Can someone please tell me what this book is about? Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I have a book review for you today. So we're going to be talking about Universal Harvester by Darnielle. But before we get into the review, please make sure to click the subscribe button below and hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss any of my uploads. So in this book, we follow Jeremy, who is 22 years old, and he is working at a place called Video Hut in the late 1990s. And his customers start returning videos that they had rented out and saying that there's something wrong with them, there's something on them. So after he gets a couple of these encounters, Jeremy decides to sit down and watch one of the movies. Kind of around the middle, it cuts away from the movie and there is some black and white sort of home video that's inserted in there, and it has some sinister content. So Jeremy can't recognize anybody in the videos, but he does recognize some landmarks around his town, and he gets wound up in trying to figure out what's going on and who's doing this to the videos. So first off, because this takes place in the 90s and it has to do with a guy that works at a video rental place, just from that part of the synopsis right there, that's why I wanted to buy the book. I was just really hoping that this was going to have some nostalgic feels for me, for growing up in the 80s and 90s. And of course, I remember going to video rental places when I was a kid and renting out things, and honestly, it had absolutely none of that. And I was really disappointed. So the only way really that you could differentiate between it was taking place in the 90s, then it was taking place now, is that there were video rental places and there was no iPhones. So I was really let down with the fact that there was no nostalgia in there for me from the 90s. And besides that, I have to say that once I actually started getting into the book, I was realizing that it had very, very little to do with what was written in the synopsis. I almost felt like I was ripped off in a way. It was like false marketing. So from the synopsis, I thought this was going to be like a fast-paced kind of mystery and sinister, and you know, it just had none of that. It was extremely slow. And like I said, it just really had nothing to do with what was described in the synopsis. Very, very little. And the entire middle section of the book actually went off in a completely different direction, and it was following the parents of someone who you would think would be a minor character. So up to that point, I only saw this woman as a minor character. She was not developed at all, and then all of a sudden we're hearing about her life story with her parents, and I was just like, what's going on? I was totally confused. I didn't know what was happening. I was like, this has nothing to do with the young guy and trying to figure out what's on these videos. So ultimately, in the end, it did turn out to have a little bit to do with it, but I gotta say the plot was extremely confusing. It was really underdeveloped, and frankly, it was dull, and that goes with the character development as well. I didn't care about any of these characters. They had very, very little development except for the one woman in the middle that kind of went off on a tangent with her life with her parents. And same with the conversation, like the plot, the conversation, the characters, they felt very forced, very underdeveloped. And like I said, it was dull and it was confusing. I kept going back to try to figure out how this was all intertwining with what I read on the inside flap of the book and why I bought the book. So I was left feeling extremely confused, and I was very, very let down. Another thing that kind of led to that confusion was I found that characters would be introduced suddenly with no lead up, no development, and all of a sudden they're talking about so-and-so, and I'm like, who is this person? I know nothing about this person. They weren't mentioned at all in the previous chapters. You don't know how they were related to kind of what was going on. And then at one point they started talking about these two people, I believe they were siblings, and all of a sudden they're talking about iPhones, and I'm like, so are we in the future now? Is this not happening in the 90s anymore? And I figured out kind of what was going on sort of as I was reading it, but I just found I had to expend so much brain power to try to figure out what was going on with this book and the plot and how it all tied together. And then at the end, it ended, like when we found out kind of what was going on with the tapes and why it was happening and how it kind of all related together, I was like, that doesn't even really make any sense. It didn't. The whole book didn't make any sense to me. The title doesn't make sense to me. I was just really let down with this read. Like, when I read the synopsis, this book had such potential to have such an amazing story and fast-paced and a mystery and sinister things going on, and it's the 90s and all the nostalgia, and it had zero of that for me. So totally let down. And then on top of that, kind of like moving away from the actual plot, I found that the author was kind of writing older women in a negative light, and the women that he was writing about weren't even that old. But there were several instances where he's talking about, you know, one woman, she's now over 40 and she's lost her memory and she has to write things down, and she's old and she's this and that, and I'm like, 40 is not someone who has dementia and has to write things down. I mean, I'm almost 40.
I mean, I'm 29.
Anyway, so there was that incident, and then there was another incident where a woman is describing to her husband how her body has been changing and she feels old and she's noticing this and that, and she's 35. So this happened, I think on 3 or 4 different occasions. That was just a couple of examples, and it really turned me off. I really felt like there was a little bit of an attack on women as they start to age and as they start to get older. And that was another really big turnoff for me. That was, you know, a little bit of the part of the plot as well. So unfortunately, I have to give Universal Harvester just 1 star. I really didn't like this read. Please let me know if you've read this book and you found it interesting. It did have a ton of 3 and 4 star ratings on Goodreads, and I just don't understand. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Please, if you enjoyed this video, leave me a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below so we can chat. But until next time, stay spooky, guys. Bye.